Welcome to the Longevity Forum podcast, a series on achieving longer, healthier, and more fulfilled lives for as many as possible. We're really excited today to hear from Andrew Steele and Lara Lewington. I'll leave it to you, Andrew.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Welcome indeed to the Longevity Forum podcast. I'm Andrew Steele. I'm a longevity scientist and author of a book called Ageless, The New Science of Getting Older Without Getting Old, and newly the director of the Longevity Initiative. I'm very excited to be joined today by Lara Lewington. Lara is a technology journalist, probably best known for presenting BBC's Click, and her new book, Hacking Humanity: How Technology Can Save Your Health and Your Life, has just hit the shelves. And that's brought her from the world of tech into the world of longevity science and medicine, as well as how health tech and AI can impact on our lifespans and health spans. Now, I'm always excited when someone who starts out in a different field takes an interest in longevity, and it's especially exciting when there's someone like Lara, who can communicate about the topic to even more people, spreading some of the excitement about the latest developments, but also bringing a critical eye to some of the wilder claims being made around the science that you might have seen on your social media feeds. So I'm really looking forward to talking about some of that today. Lara Lewington, welcome to the Longevity Forum podcast.
Hi, Andrew. Great to chat to you.
I wanted to start with how and why you decided to move into the sort of longevity and health space, I guess. What encouraged you to transition from thinking about hacking gadgets to hacking people?
I like it. Well, for a long time, the best part of 2 decades, I've been lucky enough to cover some of the greatest innovation on Earth. I'd been to space agencies, tasted future food, met countless robots, even sort of been turned into one with an exoskeleton. It was a bit like if you think of what an e-bike is to a bike or an e-scooter to a scooter, it was like e-walking. It was very weird, got my legs to move very fast. But anyway, I'd had all these amazing experiences in the world of technology. And I'd also covered quite a few health tech stories over the years. But there was a point that I became very interested in the field of longevity. And this was back at the end of 2022, when I started to see a real merging of what we considered to be health tech and what had been considered longevity. And this crossover where there were biotech companies really starting to make some progress. And there was a lot happening and a lot of interest starting to brew in that space. I decided I'd make a documentary. And this was really the beginning of it. I did the first interview with Brian Johnson. And look how far he's come since then.
What a place to start.
I know. It was his first interview that he did on his longevity stuff. And it really opened up a whole fascinating area. And there was so much that could be looked at within it. And it immediately became apparent to me that it's not about living to wild old ages. Sure, there are people who are interested in that. But the thing here that really matters, I believe, to everyone is this idea of trying to close the gap on health span and lifespan. In England, women spending a quarter of their lives in poor health. For men, a fifth. This is a real problem, and technology can offer some solutions.
Yeah, I want to talk a bit about this word longevity, actually, because, you've covered a bit of what that can mean. It can mean anything from, Brian Johnson, biohackers, doing crazy things, frankly, to try and potentially live forever, certainly try and extend their health span, to, I think, far more mundane things, everyday things. There's the sort of wearable tech that a lot of us are already, using already. And then there's the sort of longevity science, the stuff that's happening in labs where we can slow down aging in animals. What does longevity mean to you? And what do you think? Do you think we've lost control of the definition of this word to some extent because it means so many things now?
Yes, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think the bigger picture involves a lot of preventative medicine as well as greater understanding of lifestyle and the impact that lifestyle changes have on our bodies, which trackers actually allow us to understand more. So all of this comes together. But in terms of your question on the word longevity, yes, I think it's a very loaded and problematic word because it can mean so many different things. And I was constantly being told, I don't want to live till I'm a few hundred years old or whatever, from members of the public, from friends, family. Oh, I don't want to live past 90. And I wasn't suggesting for a moment that everybody does want that. Sure, there might be some people who are very excited to live far into the future. But I think if you ask most people, the thing they're really aiming for is not to spend years or decades in decline. And the idea that we can either push back or prevent entirely disease is starting to become a reality. I believe we're at the beginning of this journey and incredible things are going to happen in the decades that come.
I think a really good example of this that you talk in the book about meeting this 103-year-old former doctor called Mildred.
Yeah.
And she's just a fantastic example of, why people might not want to live to 103, what the sort of contrast between lifespan and health span. Can you talk a bit about her and what she taught you about longevity?
Absolutely. I think the critical thing I learnt from her was what health span actually means. Because she was 103 years old, she didn't have any signs of illness. There was no disease. She was mentally sharp, but she was scared every time that she stood up that she might fall over. Her daughter had died 30 years ago. Her son was bedbound. She didn't know when her next visitor was going to come. And she was living in Loma Linda, California, a place where it's a Seventh-day Adventist community. And for them, this looking after of their bodies is a duty of religiosity. And there are lots of people around, and everybody seemed to know each other. She was living in this assisted living facility. Yet still, even she was nervous about who she was going to see when and about her mobility. And this really made me think it's not about just living without disease. It's living in a way that you can feel fulfilled, that you still have a sense of purpose. And she'd had a really important life as a doctor, setting up hospitals in Africa. And I just felt she didn't have that sense of purpose there. And there were so many bits that were missing. So I think when we think about what health span means, it's not just the idea of not having disease. It's about feeling good enough to really enjoy our lives fully and having companionship, having that interaction, all those things that we know are really important, but actually considering them critical to our health rather than just a bonus.
So if we do want to make it to maybe 103, but maybe at least 93 or 83 in good health and would critically with that sense of fulfillment and connection, what are some of the most exciting developments in the longevity science and tech in your view at the moment?
I've spoken to a lot of people, and the area that most people think the greatest change is going to come is in cancer. And that's because there are so many variables. There's the location of the tumour, the genetics of the tumour, the stage of the cancer, the genetics of the patient, even their microbiome. So many things that can have an impact on how it's to be treated. And at the same time, we're seeing far better screening programmes become possible, often by screening high-risk populations. So one thing I saw recently was a group of people in Southampton who had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, them all being screened using liquid biopsy blood tests for pancreatic cancer. That's a high-risk group of a cancer with a low survival rate. So this idea of targeting the high-risk groups, again, I've seen CT scans for smokers, their lungs being checked for tumours to spot tiny tumours that can often be missed by humans but can be some of the most aggressive ones. In the diagnosis and treatment of cancer, there's certainly going to be big change to come. In terms of the longevity angle, obviously that is longevity. We're talking about finding disease early, being able to treat it better. But in simpler terms, I really think the data we're collecting on ourselves is becoming ever more valuable. So sure, we can assess our sleep, our activity, all of the basic things we've been able to do for years. But on top of that, what we can learn from continuous glucose monitors, from cortisol testing through saliva tests, from air quality data, being able to sync all of this is going to become increasingly important for us to understand our overall health picture. I'm often talking to companies that are trying to pull together all of this data with our medical records, and I suppose we are heading towards this digital twin era. I don't think we're quite there yet, but of just being able to understand more. And the more we understand, the more we can action. But of course, this does take our participation. We need to actually be wanting to do our bit. And not everybody is going to be as enthusiastic about that, as motivated or as able.
So one of the things I think people are most worried about as they get older is losing their cognitive faculties. And actually, you interviewed the first person to have ever had a Neuralink implanted. So for anyone who doesn't know, could you just explain what a Neuralink is? What was that experience like meeting that person? And do you think that kind of technology could assist people with cognitive decline into the future?
I'm not sure about cognitive decline, which I will get to in a moment, but Neuralink is Elon Musk's brain-computer interface company. There are other companies out there like Synchron, who I've also filmed with. But in this case, Nolan Darber was the first person to have one embedded, and he had the Neuralink device put in several years ago. He'd been paralysed from the shoulders down in a swimming accident in his early 20s. And for him, this has been utterly life-changing because through thought alone, he can operate a computer. And this means he can message friends, he can apply for work, there are jobs that he can do. There are so many more possibilities becoming available to him. He even talked to me about how he hopes at some point he might be able to operate his chair. He might be able to operate a humanoid robot. Now, these things, whilst they could be technically possible now, I think they're waiting until they're entirely confident on the safety of them. So for him, this has been utterly life-changing. Elon Musk throws this concept ahead to the idea of, well, instead of letting AI take over from mankind, we all need to be augmented by it. So all of us should one day have brain-computer interfaces. And look, this involves really intrusive surgery. The Neuralink one does. Anyway, the Synchron one is a slightly different procedure. So I don't think that it's likely we're all going to have them, because also so many questions this raises. At what age? When do we get them put in? Does everyone? What about the people who don't? And that seems to be becoming somewhat wild, but they are a technology that are able to do incredible things for people now. I also filmed with someone called Mark who'd had a Synchron device embedded. He has ALS, and ahead of his deterioration, he has the device there ready to hopefully help him communicate as time goes by. There's incredible possibility of a lot of this stuff, but unfortunately, sometimes those headlines do jump to the slightly wilder side of what they might be able to do.
And the idea of all of us having these things implanted, you mentioned this would require intrusive surgery. I feel like it could be quite intrusive from a privacy point of view as well. If literally everyone is connected to the internet 24/7 through their brain,
Well, yes.
Perhaps that's something to worry about further into the future.
Well, yes, that's why I don't think it's going to be what we do for cognitive decline. I don't think that this is going to be the mainstream thing we all do. Who knows? It's very hard to predict the future, but it doesn't seem very realistic to me right now.
It certainly feels a bit sci-fi dystopia, doesn't it? We're sticking more with the here and now. Should we be worried about privacy with all of this medical data more generally? Because if you've got a wearable device on your wrist, you're potentially giving big tech access to your every heartbeat, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, when you're asleep, when you're awake, when you're having intimate time with your family.
Yeah.
What are your biggest concerns around this kind of stuff?
I think it raises a few different things. First of all, we're talking about anonymized data on bulk, which is useful to the tech companies. And many people have issues, and this has been shown through surveys that have been done, that people feel better about giving their data to the NHS, for example, than they do to tech companies. Now, this may partly be an issue of trust, but I think also a bit of an issue with the concept of tech companies making money from the data that they're offering. Obviously, you are getting a service back in return for it, but you've also bought the device. So there are many sensitivities out there. Also, period tracking in countries where it's not legal to have an abortion. And there are increased sensitivities in these sort of situations. So yes, these sensitivities exist, but I think we also need to separate the idea of what we're giving tech companies from wearables and what is happening in a medical setting where obviously there are strict regulations over the protection of data. And people worry a lot about the use of AI. A lot of what's being sent back to the model is training it. But in most of the things that I'm talking about in my book, I'm not talking about somebody just using an LLM. I am giving examples of where things have gone wrong, where people have done that, where they've sometimes been used for mental health support, or they've been used for some social workers creating plans for their patient, which they shouldn't be doing like that. There are ways of doing all of this where it is done in a closed environment and it's not being sent back to the server. And most of the examples that I give in my book, and of course AI is many different things. It can be an extra pair of eyes on a scan. It can be helping a doctor take notes, or it could be even analysing micro movements in the face to be able to quantify depression, which is incredible. No human could do that. And these systems have privacy and safety at their core. They are built for purpose and they are made to be safe. And so I think whilst you can worry about anything which has access to the internet, anything that's stored anywhere, medical records, medical data do need to be held to the highest standards.
One of the other big concerns, I think, just with this, given the sort of widespread use of this word longevity for so many different things, is how we deal with the hype and unevidenced fads that I think are, getting out there more and more and more under this label, because it's being applied to things that are very scientific with good evidence, but also stuff that is being pushed by influencers that have got sort of sciencey sounding words. It can be quite hard for people to distinguish it from the real science. How can people, when they're seeing these things crop up in their social media feeds, when they're seeing advertisements, distinguish the promising science from the sort of fads or even actively dangerous stuff?
Yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts on this as well, because I think it's really difficult. And I had 1,500 citations from medical papers when I first handed it over from Penguin for this very reason. I wanted to make sure that everything that I put in there was absolutely rooted in science. And it's very easy to get caught up with the noise, feeling that you trust people when maybe you do need to look a little bit deeper into those details. So I sort of, in one interview the other day, I was talking about my book and I said, my book isn't a self-help book, but it's maybe the book you want to read alongside a self-help book, a book to explain to you where we are at with the science right now and what it's reasonable to expect or believe. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's just really, really hard because the challenge I often have is I'll get an email from a journalist and they'll say, have you heard of this new supplement? What do you think of it? And there's an extent to which quite often I already know the answer, in that it's something like, there's been a small study in mice. It might have shown a bit of promise, but it probably hasn't been tested extensively in people, certainly not over the years or decades you'd need for a longevity supplement. But the problem is I then have to often go away and look these things up. And if they're written in a plausible way, I think even as an expert, it's very, very hard. So I struggle to imagine if there is a simple rule of thumb that a normal person who hasn't got the time to dig into 1,500 scientific references can possibly do. I think the best thing to do probably is to try and find some trusted communicators. And I think we're both trying to fulfill that role.
Yeah, I think we are.
So having gone through this whole process, you've written this book, obviously, decades of tech journalism behind you as well. How has this changed how you live your life? Do you wear 5 different wearables? What are the things you do for your own health? What are the most important things we can all do for our own health today?
Funnily enough, I am actually wearing 5 different wearables at this moment, not because I usually do. I usually wear an Apple Watch and an Oura Ring, but because I'm doing an experiment of testing all the smart rings. So I do have them on at the moment and I'm just collecting the data and syncing it up and seeing the differences between them. But
that must look super bling if you've got 5 rings on.
Oh, yeah, super bling. They're all different colours as well. People keep asking about them. But the thing is, they do look a bit silly, but at least it's right on brand. Not the silly bit, but the activity trackers, just to clarify. Look, I think from all the experiments that I've done over the years, there are various takeaways that I've had. And I will just give one example of that because in different experiments, they've been different things. When I wore a continuous glucose monitor, and I've done various different experiments with them, testing and comparing different devices, a wrist-worn one with the CGM, and various other things on different platforms. But the most notable thing for me was, and if you just take this as wearing one of these devices in your arm once for 2 weeks and seeing how not just any food impacts things, but your particular diet and your habits impact you. And my big takeaway was that I used to have before lunch a vegetable juice, no fruit. There was no cheating with fruit. It was pure vegetable. And I thought this was a good thing to do. And it turned out that was my biggest sugar spike of the day. Even if I ate ice cream after dinner, because I was on holiday one week when I was testing this, that the ice cream wasn't even taking me out of range. I was having it after a meal and I was walking as well. And it was not taking me far enough for me to sort of be alerted by it. But this vegetable juice was. And so I became very aware that that wasn't the order in which to have my vegetable juice and food. And I think you just have these little takeaways. And I've done a lot of experiments. There's no way I would want to live my life Brian Johnson style to this extent all the time. But there are interesting takeaways from each of them. And I think you also note the things that matter to you. I notice if my resting heart rate's gone up a bit and it makes me think I haven't been pushing myself hard enough at the gym. Maybe I need to push myself a bit harder this week. There'll be these little motivations that come. But I think it's all about things that you can maintain for the long term and the things that work for your life. Often people talk about sleep. There were lots of people in Silicon Valley who were setting their alarm clocks to go to bed at night. I thought it was a brilliant idea, but it's just not a plausible option for me. So you take away the bits that you want.
I think that's right. I think often we sort of obsess over getting exactly precise protocols, but it's far better to do something imperfect regularly and consistently than it is to try and do perfection for a week and then get burnt out and just go back to sitting on the sofa drinking too many vegetable juice is the biggest problem.
When I left Brian Johnson's house after the first time filming with him, I was so amazed. And this was back a few years ago before he'd really had any publicity. And I was so amazed by everything he was doing because it was so extreme. And I said to my colleague when we left, I just want to be a little bit like him. I just want to do a few of those things because it'd be exhausting to do it all. But the whites of his eyes were shining so much and he had great posture. And I just sort of thought, it'd be nice to be able to achieve a little bit of that. My colleague, on the other hand, did say that it all looked utterly joyless to her. But I would love to feel the best that I possibly could. So it's just choosing the bit you can.
Well, this conversation has been anything but utterly joyless. Lara Lewington, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This broadcast has been brought to you by Longevity Forum as part of Longevity Week 2025. We're very grateful to our sponsor, Juvenescence. For more podcasts, visit our website, thelongevityforum.com.